By 1916, the First World War had become a brutal war of attrition. Both sides were now less focused on achieving dramatic victories on the battlefield and more concerned with grinding down their enemy. The goal was simple but devastating: inflict such enormous losses that the opposing nation would eventually be forced to surrender. As the war moved into 1917, this strategy pushed Europe's major powers closer than ever to collapse. Germany knew that in a long war of attrition, it faced a serious disadvantage. The Allies had access to greater resources, larger populations, and stronger economies. If the conflict dragged on indefinitely, Germany would almost certainly lose. So the German leadership decided to take a gamble. They resumed unrestricted submarine warfare. German U-boats would attack ships carrying food and supplies to Britain, cutting the island nation off from overseas trade. German commanders believed that if Britain's food imports were cut off quickly enough, the country could be starved into surrender within 6 months. But the new shoot-on-sight tactics carried a dangerous risk. Neutral ships would inevitably be caught in the crossfire, and if American vessels were attacked, the United States might enter the war on the Allied side. Just 2 days after the campaign began, the danger became real. The SS Housatonic, an American cargo ship carrying wheat from Galveston, Texas to England, was sunk by a German U-boat. Soon afterward, British intelligence delivered another shocking revelation to the United States government. They had intercepted a secret telegram sent by German Foreign Secretary Arthur Zimmermann to the German ambassador in Mexico. In the message, Germany proposed an alliance with Mexico. If the United States entered the war against Germany, Mexico would attack the United States. In return, Germany promised to support Mexico in reclaiming territories it had lost decades earlier. When the Zimmermann telegram became public, it created outrage across the United States. It placed enormous pressure on President Woodrow Wilson to declare war on Germany. Meanwhile, events in Russia were spiraling toward revolution. Years of enormous casualties, combined with severe food shortages, had pushed the country into crisis. Riots erupted in the capital, and soon revolution followed. Tsar Nicholas II abdicated the throne, bringing an end to centuries of imperial rule in Russia. A new provisional government took power and pledged to continue fighting the war alongside the Allies. But the Russian army was already collapsing. At the front, soldiers were exhausted, demoralized, and increasingly unwilling to fight. Desertions began spreading across entire units. After a series of German provocations at sea, the United States finally declared war on Germany. America brought immense industrial and financial resources to the Allied cause, but mobilizing those resources would take time. American troops would require many months before they could arrive in large numbers in Europe. In the meantime, Germany hoped its submarine campaign could still force Britain out of the war. During April of 1917, German U-boats reached the peak of their success. In that single month, they sank nearly 886,000 tons of Allied shipping. On average, 17 ships were destroyed every day. Many of these vessels carried desperately needed food and supplies. If the U-boat threat could not be stopped, Britain faced the terrifying possibility of starvation. On the Western Front, the British launched a major offensive at Arras. The attack was intended as a diversion to support a much larger French operation planned nearby. After intense fighting, Canadian troops succeeded in capturing the heavily defended Vimy Ridge. It was an important Allied victory, but it came at a heavy cost. The battle resulted in roughly 150,000 Allied casualties, while German losses reached around 130,000. Meanwhile, the war in the skies had become more important than ever. Aircraft now played a crucial role in reconnaissance. Observation planes photographed enemy positions and helped direct artillery fire. At the same time, fighter aircraft attempted to shoot down these reconnaissance planes before they could complete their missions. Technology advanced rapidly, with new aircraft designs appearing every few months. But during the spring of 1917, the Germans held the advantage in the air. Allied pilots suffered severe losses during this period, which became known as Bloody April. Just 3 days after the capture of Vimy Ridge, French General Robert Nivelle launched the main offensive he believed would finally break the stalemate on the Western Front. Expectations were extremely high. Nivelle had promised that his strategy would deliver victory within days, but after some early successes, the attack quickly stalled. Casualties began to mount on both sides. What had been promised as a decisive breakthrough soon turned into another costly failure. The enormous losses shattered morale within the French army. Entire units refused orders to attack again. Mutinies spread through the army, although most soldiers were still willing to defend their positions. General Nivelle was removed from command. He was replaced by General Philippe Pétain, the respected defender of Verdun. Pétain focused on restoring discipline and promised that soldiers would no longer be sent into hopeless attacks. During the summer of 1917, British forces launched an extraordinary operation at Messines Ridge. For months, British engineers had secretly dug tunnels deep beneath German defensive positions. When the attack began, 19 enormous mines were detonated simultaneously under the German lines. The explosions were so powerful that they were heard many miles away. At the time, it was the largest man-made explosion in history. The blast destroyed large sections of the German defenses and allowed British forces to capture the ridge. Later that year, the British launched their main offensive of 1917 in Belgium. The battle would become infamous as Passchendaele. Heavy artillery bombardments devastated the landscape. Then relentless rain turned the battlefield into a vast sea of mud. Shell craters filled with water, trenches collapsed, soldiers struggled to move across the flooded ground. In these terrible conditions, hopes for a breakthrough quickly disappeared. After 3 months of fighting, the offensive was finally called off. By that point, the British had suffered around 240,000 casualties, while German losses reached roughly 200,000. On the Italian front, another brutal battle unfolded along the Isonzo River. Italian and Austro-Hungarian forces battered each other in repeated attacks. The fighting left roughly 150,000 Italian casualties and around 100,000 Austro-Hungarian losses. During 1917, the list of Allied nations also grew. Brazil, Liberia, China, and Siam all declared war on Germany. China in particular contributed thousands of laborers who supported Allied forces in Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. Meanwhile, events in the Middle East were reshaping the conflict. British forces avenged their earlier defeat at Kut by advancing against Ottoman forces and capturing the city of Baghdad. British troops operating from Egypt also advanced across the Sinai Desert. But early attempts to capture the city of Gaza ended in failure. In July, Arab rebels captured the strategic Ottoman port of Aqaba. They were accompanied by a British officer who would later become famous, Captain T.E. Lawrence, known to history as Lawrence of Arabia. Later that year, British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour issued the Balfour Declaration. The declaration expressed British support for the creation of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. Its goal was to strengthen Allied support, but it also complicated earlier promises made to Arab leaders. In October, British forces finally succeeded in defeating Ottoman defenses at Gaza. The victory opened the road to Palestine. 6 weeks later, General Edmund Allenby led British troops into Jerusalem, ending 400 years of Ottoman rule over the city. Meanwhile, the collapse of the Russian army had dramatic consequences. Germany was now able to move large numbers of troops from the Eastern Front to other battlefields. On the Italian front, these reinforcements helped launch a powerful offensive at the Battle of Caporetto. The attack shattered Italian defenses. The Italian army retreated nearly 70 miles, and roughly 250,000 soldiers were captured. British and French divisions had to be rushed to Italy to stabilize the front. Back in Russia, political turmoil reached a new stage. A second revolution brought Vladimir Lenin and the Bolshevik Party to power. Lenin was determined to end Russia's involvement in the war. Meanwhile, in France, Georges Clemenceau became prime minister. Nicknamed the Tiger, he promised total war and total victory. Yet by late 1917, the Allied position still looked uncertain. Russia had effectively stopped fighting, French forces were recovering from mutiny. The Italian front had nearly collapsed, and American reinforcements had only just begun to arrive. For the moment, Britain remained the only Allied power capable of launching major operations on the Western Front. In November, the British launched an attack at Cambrai using a new strategy centered around tanks. Nearly 400 tanks spearheaded the assault. On the first day, they smashed through German defenses and advanced several miles. But the success could not be sustained. Many tanks broke down or were destroyed, and German reinforcements quickly arrived. Much of the ground gained in the first attack was eventually lost. Meanwhile, political changes continued to reshape Europe. Finland declared independence from Russia. Romania, isolated after Russia's collapse, signed an armistice with the Central Powers. Only days later, Russia itself agreed to a ceasefire. The entire Allied Eastern Front had disappeared. The year 1917 had seen one major Allied power, Russia, knocked out of the war. But it had also brought a powerful new ally into the conflict: the United States. Germany now understood that once American forces arrived in strength, the balance of the war would shift decisively in favor of the Allies. So German commanders began preparing one final gamble: a massive offensive designed to win the war before American power could fully arrive. The decisive battles of 1918 were about to begin.